Hey everybody. I am currently working on a motorcycle of mine, and figured I'd probably just go ahead and start a new series. I've never really done anything like this before, as far as uploading it, but I just got this. This is a 1986 Honda Goldwing Aspencade SEI. In a moment, I'll go kind of in further detail about what that actually means. But I got yesterday knowing it needed some work and knowing that I would probably be willing to do most of it, at least, as far as what I know is wrong. Like I said, I just got this, so there's not a ton that I already know about it. Now, what I do know about it is that this is a particular example that is really pretty nice, or at least could be pretty nice. This came from factory with almost every single option you could option one of these out with. This has a quadraphonic sound, which is what you see right here, those two speakers up front. The two speakers are little wedges here in the rear. That's adjustable via this audio kind of centering dealio, similar to what Oldsmobile or some of the General Motors cars used back in the late 80s and early 90s. Comes with a AM/FM cassette deck right there, a fully digital dash display. Like I said, I've got this already tearing all apart. I was going to make a video on it, but I wasn't really sure what exactly I would even do or say. But figured now was as good a time as any, even if I just started, but I already got it. It comes with a full trip computer. Now this has a trip odometer, computer itself, so it calculates, you can see right up here, fuel economy, its range, how much is on board, gives you some of the information if you just want to look down from the driver's seat as far as what the dash has as well. This does come with cruise control up here. Additionally, does come with a passenger and driver intercom, which is activated mainly up here, as well as a CB receiver, which is part of the reason it has such an enormous antenna. These bikes are really, I saw one guy quote it really well as to what these are, which is a road couch. Whereas a lot of motorcycles from this point in time, like I said, 1986, were either a lot of Japanese sports bikes were really getting a name at the time, as well as we still had, at least here in the U.S., a lot of domestic brands. Well, not a lot, but some very popular domestic brands like Harley-Davidson, which at the time were, of course, really, really well known for making big cruisers. Well, in 1975, this is kind of just a brief history. You can look into this a lot further, but a brief history of why Goldwings, which is what this is, ever came to be, it is really pretty fascinating bit of history, where Honda had not just gotten into the motorcycle market, but had gotten a name for themselves, I should say, in the motorcycle market here in the U.S. When I think it was about 1975, and of course the years just prior to that, they were trying to develop a motorcycle to really compete with some of the big cruisers, not maybe as similar to those as maybe some of the later actual cruiser bikes that came out of the other Japanese companies, but they wanted something that was really fast, comfortable, superbly comfortable, and can easily go long distances without really any rider fatigue. Well, this is kind of what they came up with. Not these exact models here. That's an 85. That's one I've already got. But they Goldwings really started as maybe not quite as much of a big full dress tourer like these ones are, these two GL1200s. The original 1000cc Goldwings were a flat four. They were superbly smooth, superbly powerful, superbly comfortable. But if you ever take a look at a 75 or 76 Goldwing, like when they really came out for the first time, you'll notice that there's, no front fairing really, no trunk, no bags, nothing really like that. It is just kind of a big motorcycle and that's it. There's not a lot to it. They're pretty stripped down. Well, after the first few model years, see, Honda had kind of marketed, or not marketed, but just prior to the release of the Goldwing in 75, Honda had kind of been hyping up, more or less, the motorcycling world for something that people were expecting to really be a full dress tourer. A good number of people, when the Goldwing was really announced in 75 and first started going on sale, were kind of disappointed that it wasn't really all that they had expected. It didn't have a front fairing, didn't have a trunk, didn't have, certain luxury features like, take for example, like what Harley Davidson's had with their, really, really heavy, big touring focused bike like the FLH Electra Glide and things like that. Well, by about 1979, 1980, Honda had realized their kind of fault. Now, there were kind of two mindsets in Honda at the time when the Goldwing was being announced, or when the Goldwing was being developed, pardon. One was to make it really just go all out for a full dress, really big, really heavy touring bike. The other was kind of have it a bit more sporty, how Honda had eventually went, with just being pretty stripped down bike that could tour, that, had a lot of power, was big, reasonably heavy. Whereas in about 1981, they realized that their other mindset was really what was going to get them going. So with the introduction of the GL 1200, the Goldwing, or not 1200, pardon, the 1100 in 1980, they had enlarged that flat four-cylinder engine by about 100 cc's and really just went all out. This is not an 1100, but there are differences, but there are not enormous differences in at least the total idea of the bike. They're both really at that point had become big, heavy touring motorcycles. No doubt about it. Albeit they're still plenty fast, they still have a lot of power, but their focus at that point was sheerly just being a comfortable touring motorcycle. Now, Honda, in 1984, I believe, was going to be their last revision of their four-cylinder bikes. Now, of course, they didn't really know that at the time, but that was probably something they were considering, was that they were going to stop doing four-cylinder Goldwings after the 1200s that they were developing for the 1984 to 87 model years. And they really wanted an excuse to go all out. They enlarged the engine again by 100 cc's. At that point, they were starting to get to the point of diminishing returns as far as displacement on their flat four architecture, being as they noticed that you were starting to get, as the stroke and bore enlarged, you were starting to feel the firing of every, firing event of the engine more and more, which, is going to make the motorcycle feel a lot more unsmooth, if you're sitting at a stoplight or when you're really just letting it idle and sitting there. Well, as Honda was realizing that, they determined that they should probably go ahead and give one last, kind of send-off to these initial Goldwings. So for the 1985 and 86 model year, they had introduced, for 1985, the Goldwing LTD, or limited edition. And for 1986, the Goldwing SEI, or Special Edition Injected. Now, both the 85 and 86 had a fuel-injected variant of this flat 4 1200. And as you can see here, it is very much fuel-injected. I have a good example of a not fuel-injected 1200 over here. This is my 1985 Interstate. This is about the base model, kind of just an entry-level Goldwing that you can get. You notice here, there's significantly fewer features on this as there are compared to this. You got just a seat. You don't have any armrests. There's not really any trunk chrome going on, anything like that. I mean, it's a pretty basic, nice, balance of a touring motorcycle. Now, this is definitely far from perfect, but this is the bike that I have been riding for a decent amount this summer. This is the summer of 2024. Here you can see that this is, of course, in fact, a fully carbureted bike. Honda had used 4 individual carburetors. As you can see, 1, 2, and then 2 on the other side as well, as a kind of a substitute for being able to get a lot of power out of these 1200 flat fours. With the bigger displacement, you can't just have bigger displacement and nothing else. You have to have something to actually feed, continue with that displacement. Now, these 1200s are probably the pinnacle of the 4-cylinder motorcycling, touring motorcycle, I should say, era. You had things like the Suzuki Cavalcade and the Voyager 12 from Kawasaki that were also extremely, frankly, very good motorcycles, but at least in my own opinion, I would say that the Goldwing was still kind of the benchmark, the bike to beat from those companies, or in comparison to those companies, I should say. Now, the SCI and the limited edition, the LTD from 1985, those were both the top of the trim motorcycles. In 84, when they had first introduced the 1200, you could get a fully stripped down, they called it a Goldwing Standard, only for that model year on 1200s. That marked kind of the end of just having a standard Goldwing. But on the other end of the spectrum, you had things like this, even more loaded. Like I said, you got quadraphonic audio, you have a trip computer, you have cassette, this, and that. Which, at the time, if you were buying a luxury motorcycle, some of these you did expect, but some of them, even nowadays, a perfect example of that, in my opinion, is the rear auto-leveling self-suspension, or self-leveling rear air suspension. Now, you could control this just at the flick of your thumb up here. Some of these controls are for that, some of them are not. This, for example, is for this passenger intercom system. But this does have a fully automatic self-leveling rear air suspension. This has an air compressor built on board, rear air shocks. This has front air shocks as well that are additionally connected into the system. You can see an air line going in right about there. Whereas on this, you do have full air suspension, but it's not automatic. You do have to charge it up at the rear behind this panel and up here at the front at that nipple right there. Now, for anybody curious about doing maintenance on one of these, like I have had to do at least, I would recommend YouTube is a fantastic resource, as are a lot of the online forums for these Goldwings. They do have quite a following to them. Thankfully, Honda built about 1 billion of these things, so they're really not that hard to find information or parts for, at least Goldwings in general. These limited edition models, however, is a little bit of a different story, but they are, in actuality, pretty similar bikes to both the standard Aspencades and the Interstates of the era. Now, of course, one major difference is the fact that this does have a fuel injection system. Now, in comparison to a bike like that does add a lot of added complexity to the electronics system on this. This has a full sort of ECU in it. These lines right here, just for example, are vacuum lines going up to, there's not only one on this side, but one on that side, and another one in the induction system somewhere. I can't recall at the top of my head. But sort of give you a kind of an insight into how advanced this was for the time, back in 1986. Now, you, of course, did have plenty of fuel-injected cars back in 1986, and the automotive world, fuel injection was not really anything brand new at that point. But in the same vein, Honda was making cars back in 1986 that still were using carburetors, and that, again, wasn't really that unheard of. However, on a motorcycle, from what I've heard, this is the first motorcycle, non-sports motorcycle, to come with fuel injection as a factory option. I believe Kawasaki, it was, maybe Suzuki, I cannot recall off the top of my head, had a fuel-injected sports bike a little earlier than this in the early 80s, but as far as touring bikes go, this was the first fuel-injected one, this and the LTD in 1985. One of the issues I've run into this, at least, since I got it, and I knew this going in, is that the starter had gone out. Now, getting the starter out on these is really not that terrible of a job, at least if you have some information and know what you're doing. I'd certainly recommend watching a video, But the only way you're really going to know is if you do it, which is exactly what I found out. See a video of a guy just drop the exhaust, kind of rotate it out of the way, just pull the starter out. Now, I couldn't really do that. I'm not sure if this thing had been laid down in the past, but the roll bar had to come off in order to get at the starter. Now, as you can see, I did successfully get the starter out. I didn't break anything, thankfully. But getting the starter out on these is not really the end of the world. If you have a starter fail on this, don't throw the whole bike away, I'd say. Another issue on this is I just want to go ahead and go through most of the electronics on this. I don't know what these are. Those don't appear to be factory, and I'd like to put this bike back to 100% as it left the assembly line. Now, as far as other issues go, I'm not so sure of many. The former owner had let me know that he had done a lot of work on it. Now, there's a rather large oil puddle there that was partially from me removing the starter as it goes right into the crankcase there. And it does have a slight oil leak as well underneath, but that's not what that's from. Going to have to do a fuel filter, oil change, rear, shaft fluid change. He did say that has new tires, which they certainly do appear new. Whereas on that bike, I believe it still has a tire from the late 90s. It's probably only the second tire it's ever had in its life, and it's still on it. Desperately needs replaced, but that's besides the fact. He had the front tubes redone, sealed, made sure that they've been properly serviced. Yeah, I really just want to bring this bike back to, just really, really good condition. When I got it, this is about how it appeared without all the plastics. The guy did let me know he had the plastics with it, the original, proper color match limit or SEI side covers. Now, these side covers, or I should say these SEIs, only came in one color. This is it. I can't recall exactly what they called it, but I've heard it kind of referred to as a platinum cream or something along those lines. And, I mean, personally, I think it's a pretty nice color. Of course, that's only all opinionated. But there are just some things here and there, like this. It's missing its cover on it. This came with about 9 different sets of keys, unmatching ones. But the reason is, I think probably the former owner just wanted to replace a bunch of parts, but they replaced this, which is a different key than the ignition. They replaced the, I should say this. That's the fuel cover. Fuel fill is under that. They replaced both the saddlebags. They do, thankfully, share the same key. And the trunk is original, though. The trunk, at least as far as I know, because it still does take the original key from the ignition of the bike. Overall, I am certainly excited to get working on this. Anybody else who wants to kind of know a little more about this bike, you can look it up. There's a lot of information still online about these. I would definitely recommend, I'm not sponsored or in any kind of, deal with them or anything, but I would certainly recommend checking out Goldwing Docs. They have a fantastic website hosting a number of different documents, shop manuals, brochures, plenty of stuff on that. That really helped me when I was first getting this bike going, really helped me with this one. So anyways, if you guys care to like or anything like that, go ahead and do it. I don't really care, but I like making this, and if you guys like it, that's good too. So we'll see you around.